understand. And this came about because I managed to get to a presentation that Lisa and Cassie made
My colleague.
and she's at the back, at the Unitarian Church where Jeremy Harrison Smith had invited her to come. And it was just much more interactive, and it makes sense. It's because League of Women Voters is supporting this, and that there is legislation now before the House and the Senate, 1722 and 5708.
Boy, you're good. She's got them right. Yes.
Okay, so these are pieces of legislation that are before our legislature now. So if you're too far away to hear, you might want to come in closer, but with no further explanation, I'll let Lisa take over, and Dave is doing some filming, I guess, or
yeah.
I don't know what, and
Yeah.
Robert has hooked everything up, I guess. So we're ready to get started. If you aren't hearing, just come in a little closer.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for inviting us. Really appreciate it. We're glad to have the opportunity.
And don't be upset if some people have to leave,
No,
and that's
please.
the way it
Listen,
works.
it's so uplifting to come into a room and see you all engaged in such productive work, and I am not even slightly offended if you want to keep working at your postcards while we talk. That's just fine. And I want to thank Carol for the invitation, Jim for helping us with tech, Cassie, my colleague, who will help you get oriented at the table, informational table at the end if you're interested in signing up at the end or more information. She's got all that there. She'll also be helping me with Q&A time. And then I have two also fellow volunteers. I'm a volunteer, and so are Robert in the back and David, who's going to film today's presentation because we are exploding with interest in this reform, and it's no longer sufficient to have just one or two or three of us doing speaking presentations. We're getting so many. In fact, as I walked in the room, we were getting a request for a speaking engagement in Vancouver next week, really all over the state. And so we're working to train new speakers, and that's what this will be for. Okay. All right, let me just start quickly. How many of you would say, and raise your hand if the answer is yes, would say that you had heard about ranked choice voting even before you knew that Carol had set this up today? It's something you had heard about. Fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. And how, out of those of you, how many would say that you today, before we hear this presentation, would feel fairly comfortable saying what it is if you had to explain to a friend or neighbor? Hand up if you feel comfortable. So we're going to change that. We want to have all your hands go up before we're done today. Okay. And we'll cross our fingers for technology working. Good, it did. How about that? So Fair Vote Washington, we are a grassroots group of volunteers all over the state, more than 5,000 of us at this point. Just all of that activity has really just been in the last year, so a real groundswell of interest in this reform, working to bring electoral reforms that give voters more voice, more choice, and that bring us a more functional and representative democracy. So we have this lovely, amazing legacy, all of us. This democratic republic constitution preserves the jurisdiction over elections to the states. And it also calls us to perfect that democracy in that wonderful preamble, thinking about striving always for a more perfect union. So with that background, how are we doing today?
Badly. Very badly.
There's a sense that we're in a moment when we need to step up and take responsibility for our responsibility to steward this remarkable republic that we're charged with. A republic if we can keep it, as Benjamin Franklin said. Yeah? So I want to ask this question here today. If there's anything at the root of a democracy and a democratic republic, it's got to be voting. How we vote is foundational. And we'll have a look today at some ways that other jurisdictions in our country, other countries around the world, are finding that they've improved the way they vote, and it's bringing some benefits that are really worth considering here in Washington. Let's begin with a problem that we can see illustrated in a governor's race in Oregon, 1990, where there were 3 candidates. Does anybody remember this race at all? Anybody living in Oregon? So the Democrat, Barbara Roberts, won that race, and my laser pointer doesn't work on the screen TV, I don't know why, but she's over there on the left in blue. And if you're not having trouble seeing, she's got just under 46% of the vote. She won that election, she had the most votes, because her 2 opponents split the vote. You can see, even though the independent Al Mobley, who's on the right, he held very conservative views, even further to the right than the somewhat centrist Republican Dave Frohnmeyer. Together, the 2 of them had more than half the vote. 53% of the voters wanted a conservative in this race, and yet the Democrat won. So if you're somebody who supported the independent Al Mobley, if you liked him, you had a hard decision. Do you vote for the candidate you really like best? Do you like just throwing away your vote? Who's ever felt that way before? Have you in a race? Some of us have. Where you like a candidate you don't think that's a front runner, or you're afraid of throwing away your vote. Maybe if you liked Frohnmeyer and you looked at the polling results and you were worried, looks like it might be a tight race, I think I better not throw away my vote. Instead I'll just hold my nose and vote for the lesser of the 2 evils of the front runner. Either choice is tough, right? If you like Mobley, those are just not very exciting choices to have when you go to the polls. Well, here in Washington, we don't let the winner have 46% of the vote, right? We go to a top 2 primary. And that has been a good advance. It's an improvement. But we still have a problem with vote splitting. The same kind of vote splitting can happen at the primary level for us. And this is a great race that illustrates that. In 2016, the race for Washington state treasurer was between 5 candidates, 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. The 3 Democrats split up that vote fairly evenly so that none of them had as many votes as each of the 2 Republicans, who had 25%, 23% each. I know it's a little bit hard to see those numbers. Basically, those 3 Democrats split up more than half the votes. More than half the voters wanted a Democrat in that race, and yet only 2 Republicans went to the general election ballot. The only 2 that the voters had to choose from were those 2. So again, we can see this problem of vote splitting with the current way we vote, where voters just get to choose one, can yield very unrepresentative outcomes. More problems with the way we vote now. We certainly see a lot of negative campaigning. Now you might think, oh, that's just part of politics. Well, we'll have a look at that. I maintain it has to do with the way we vote that actually drives that negative dynamic and then leads to this hyper-partisanship that we're seeing now. And all of that is leading to us to have just abysmal rates of voter turnout. In spite of the efforts, I'm sure there are many of you in the room that do your best to try to get people out to the polls. It's tough. So who's to blame for this dysfunction we're seeing? Well, a lot of people like to blame those voters who don't show up at the polls. It's their fault. If only they would get out and vote, be responsible. Well, would you go to an ice cream shop that only offered 2 flavors and you don't like either one very much? No. How about the candidates? How about those 3 Democratic candidates for Secretary of State? They all wanted to be Secretary of State. If only 1 or 2 of them could have had the decency to drop out of the race, then we would have had a better outcome. People love to blame the candidates too. But in most areas of our life, we think it's a good thing to have more choices. Why not in elections? It's good to have more voices in the race. It's really the system that is the problem. It's our choose one voting system, which is, we inherited from England back when we declared our independence as a republic, and most other advanced democracies that inherited their voting system from England back then have long since replaced it. Truth be told, we have gotten so used to the way we vote that we don't even notice it anymore. It's kind of like the air we breathe or the water these little guys are swimming in. You just don't even notice how poorly it's serving us and how outdated it is.
England has changed their voting system, haven't they?
They have not. And how
They
are they doing? How are they doing?
Oh, okay.
And this is, the conversation about the voting system being at the root of dysfunction is raging there too. And the same solution is what folks are trying to come.
There were some articles that showed that if England did have ranked choice voting, that the Conservatives wouldn't have won the majority because it was because of the winner-take-all system that this happened.
We'll get to all this in Q&A time, but yeah,
So-
that's a great question, yes. Okay, so there's a better way, and it's called ranked choice voting. Instead of being limited to just choosing one on your ballot, you get to list your backup if you want. You can say not only who your first choice is, like usual, but also second choice, third choice, and fourth choice, and so on. That way, if your first choice doesn't have enough support to win, your vote still counts for your backup choice. Very simple. Santa Fe, New Mexico started using ranked choice voting a year ago. This was something they sent out to educate new voters. You know, ranking is not a new idea. It's something we do all the time. If I go over to the co-op looking for some apples, I'm gonna look for pink ladies, those are my favorite. But if I don't find those, I'll get Fuji's, I'm good with those. Or if I don't even see either one of those, Gala would be my third. We just do it all the time, we don't even think about it. I think we should go ahead and show this little video today. Sometimes I show it and sometimes I don't. Let's have a look. This, I think, means that I'm gonna need to see if this, actually I forgot to check if we have audio. Let's find out.
In most elections, you only vote for one
Obviously,
candidate for
everything
each
working.
office. But in some elections, voters can rank 3 or more candidates for each office. It's called ranked choice voting. Here's an example of how it works. All of the candidates will be listed on the ballot in 3 columns. Make your first choice vote in column 1 by filling in the oval of the candidate you'd most like to win. Vote for your second choice in column 2, and make your third choice in column 3. That's all there is to it. Now let's see how the votes are counted. Let's say there are 4 candidates running for mayor: Asha, Zach, Omar, and Lucy. Once the polls close, we count all the first choice votes first. To be elected mayor, a candidate needs more than half the votes. In this example, Asha has more than half of the votes, so she's declared the winner. However, if no candidate gets more than half the votes, we start eliminating candidates and counting the next choices of those who voted. In this example, Zach is the candidate with the smallest number of first choice votes, so he is cut. We use the second choice votes on Zach's ballots and count those voters' second choices instead. If one of the remaining candidates now has more than half of the total votes, that candidate is declared the winner. If not, the next lowest candidate, Lucy, is eliminated. Her votes are now counted for the next choice on the ballot. Some of Lucy's votes went to Zach, who's already eliminated, so those new votes for Zach instead count for those voters' third choice candidate. We are now down to 2 candidates, and Omar clearly has more than half of the votes. That makes him the winner. That's how ranked choice voting works. For more information on ranked choice voting, visit our website.
All right, well, we're gonna give it a try. How many of you participated in the caucus? I'm guessing virtually all of you have. Does it look familiar? Really, that's all ranked choice voting is a kind of a simulated caucus. But let's go ahead and give it a try. I'm gonna pass out some very fancy ballots, and I know you all have pens handy. Blank piece of paper is all it is. So let me pass those down one side and maybe, I have a couple of snacks here to put down. There you go. Just grab a ballot, and if you don't get one of my ballots, you can use any smidge of paper, because I'm actually not going to collect these. And let's vote on, oh gosh, you know what, I forgot, Cassie, you didn't have to bring that whiteboard, did you, today?
In my car, I have one.
No, I only got
ballots.
Who's got, is there anybody? Do you have one? Forgotten all my props. It's not a big deal. You guys can definitely follow this. So we're gonna have, let's do an election with 5 choices, shall we? I think this is a good sized group for 5. So I would like to take nominations for, let's vote on, what's the most topical thing today? We're in a democratic organizing meeting. Let's figure out who your favorite Democratic presidential candidate is. Shall we do that? Sure. That one first, and then we maybe we'll have time for another election. Okay, so I know there are a lot in this field right now, but if you could just raise your hand and nominate one you'd like to see on the ballot. Who would you like to put on the
Elizabeth
ballot?
Warren.
So Warren, so let's put on Warren. Who else?
So everybody write that down.
Sure, you can write it down, yep.
Amy Klobuchar.
Klobuchar. Okay, who else?
Bernie Sanders.
Sanders. Buttigieg, and let's do one more. Biden, okay. So that's our ballot. Your ballot should have those 5 names: Warren, Klobuchar, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Biden. So go ahead and rank them. You can write it down however you like, because I'm not gonna collect it, just make sure you know what you wrote. Biden? One, two, three, four, 5. Warren, Klobuchar, Sanders, Buttigieg, and Biden. And you're gonna rank them. First, who's your first choice? Who's your second choice? And so on. Now, you don't have to rank any more than you care about. If you just have one and you don't care about the rest, you just put down one. That's the way it works in a ranked choice election. Nobody's forced to rank. It's an option we have. When you're finished with your ranking, if you could just put your pen down, look up the content. Okay, you guys are fast. All right, who's your first choice? Elizabeth Warren, and what's your name?
Barbara.
Barbara, would you come over and stand, Barbara, if you could stand up over in that corner, and come stand next to Barbara if Elizabeth Warren is also your first choice, right? So this is just first choice for Warren right over here. How about you, ma'am?
Amy.
And you're Amy?
Yeah,
And who's your first choice?
that was my.
Oh, Amy Klobuchar. I thought you were Amy, awesome. Amy Klobuchar, come on over, we're on first name basis with the candidates, come on over. Amy Klobuchar, come on over here if you're, all right, how about Sanders? Any Sanders fans? Let's come stand right here, Sanders. Okay, and you know what, yeah, we'll just have to remember, but, so if I do this right, what we do, actually, let's do, since we're getting videotaped, let's, could you just, let's see, I wonder, Cassie, didn't you could come help me and just make a little sign for each one, and then in each of the corner, I'm gonna ask you just hold up the name of your candidate so I don't forget which ones you are. Okay, so we're up to Buttigieg. Anybody for Buttigieg? Yeah. Yeah, good, right here then. Right, that's not Buttigieg, right here. Buttigieg, and finally,
Where?
right here. Joe Biden. Are there any Joe Biden fans in the room? Yay, good. You stand right there, okay? So this is Biden. You're good. Now, this is gonna be great. And Cassie's making you a sign to hold up for your candidate, so let's see. We're Bernie yet?
He's over here.
Thank you, Cassie, this is perfect. Yeah.
Is it Bernie? Bernie? Yep. Biden, and then
Joe's over here.
Joe's over there, and then we got
There we go.
Klobuchar. Let's see if I can get this one right.
You can just.
You can call her
Amy.
I like Amy.
CLR.
First name is good.
Yeah, Amy.
We're gonna go with Amy at the top here. No, look at the bottom. And then we have a Biden.
And then we got Biden. Okay,
There you go.
terrific. So, there you are, holding up your signs, and let's just quickly, Elizabeth Warren, how many of you are there?
4.
4, and Klobuchar? 3. Bernie has 2.
4.
Buttigieg has 5.
5.
And Biden has 1. Do we have a winner?
No.
We have a plurality winner. If we were voting the way we normally do, the election would be over, Pete Buttigieg would be the winner, and how many of you would not have had a voice in this election? Raise your hand if you would not have had a voice. That's most of the people in the room would not have had a say. So clearly, when you have a crowded field, picking the person who gets the most votes is a terrible way to choose, isn't it? Yeah. All right, well, this is gonna be a ranked choice selection. So we need to have, how many people do we have to have in the same corner in order to have this election be over?
Oh, about 8 or 9.
We better be sure. I think if we're gonna be running, I've been meeting with a lot of county auditors, and I'll tell you, they would make, you have to have the rules clear out.
We got 15 people total.
Eight.
So we need eight, right. That's our threshold to win, is 8. Has to be a majority, and you guys understand that math. So, we're not there yet, so what's the next step? What do we do now?
We take a second choice.
Biden, so we say to the fan of Joe Biden, we're so glad that you felt you could vote honestly for your real first choice, that you didn't, but you know you didn't waste your vote by putting it on Biden, but because your vote now gets, your voice will still count in this election, but for your second choice, so please, if you could move to your
Do I
second
take my
choice.
second choice?
Go to your second choice, so check your ballots, see who you have. Maybe you could
over here.
All right, interesting. So now we count again. Do we have the threshold?
No.
No. So what's the next step?
2 for here.
Bernie's gonna be going out, but your voices are not eliminated from this election, so you two ladies get to go to your next choice.
Mm-hmm.
So how many do you have in Elizabeth's
6
corner?
and 6.
6. And then this is also,
Wow.
it's all gonna come down. So this is fascinating. So it's gonna be the Klobuchar voters who are gonna get to determine this election. Off you go. We're eliminating Klobuchar. Where are you gonna go?
Second choice. Second.
No, who's your next choice?
Well, I know, but who are you?
We're Warren.
Oh, Warren.
And.
Who to judge?
Who to judge?
My second choice was Biden.
So, well, do you have a third choice? Your second choice is not in the race anymore.
Warren.
That is an interesting outcome. So the winner is Ms. Warren, and she was not the plurality winner in this election. Now, that was a really great example. You know, most of the time, when we do a ranked choice election, it's most common for the plurality winner to end up being also the ranked choice winner, but sometimes not. And we can see, I think, quite clearly, that if given a choice between only these two candidates, the majority of the people in this room today preferred Warren over Buttigieg, but that was not evident only in the first round.
The part I don't understand is why is it that people who had the least, we start with the person who only had one vote, why is it the people who had the second most populous, like why weren't we the ones who got to make our choice? That's my question.
Were you were standing with Elizabeth Warren the whole time? Is that right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So in essence, you voted every round also, but you just stayed with her every time. And the people whose candidates,
I see, because they got dropped out.
their candidates were gone. It's like when you go vote in the August primary,
Mhm.
if your candidate makes it to the November top 2, then you're gonna vote presumably for the same candidate again, yeah?
Okay.
But if your candidate gets eliminated in the primary, you get a choice, you go to your next choice.
Okay.
It's
That's
just like that.
interesting, because to me intuitively, it seemed like we should have been the ones that got to choose. when they-
You did,
We
you were,
did,
yeah.
Okay, we did. Got it.
Oh, can I make a point?
Yeah,
If you have 3 candidates only running for an office, then this is mathematically identical to having a top 2 primary. Because in the top 2 primary, the bottom candidate gets eliminated, and then you vote it for your next choice in the general. But if you had this many candidates, like 10, you would have to have a top 9 primary first, and then a top 8 primary, and then a top 7 primary. So ranked choice voting is just like that, except we don't have to have 7 or 8 or 9 primaries in order to do it. We just rank them once.
Okay.
Okay, I think, based on my sort of experience in life as a teacher and a mother, I think it's a good idea to do something twice when you first learn it. It's new, you to do it twice. So we're gonna do it one more time. Could you go ahead and have a seat if you want to, and with the same piece of paper, your favorite season, please, winter, spring, summer, fall. You can rank them. And we'll do this fairly quickly. Oh, it's just, we're gonna vote on your favorite season, winter, spring, summer, fall.
So I have a quick question.
Sure.
This is a picture, that one little, thing that you showed up there, when the people, separate, when your person comes in last, are those people divided equally? I couldn't tell when those.
From the video?
Yeah.
You know,
So,
sometimes
how
I
does-
find those videos can be more confusing than
But,
helpful.
but is it split 50-50 going to, do you see what I'm saying?
No, I'm afraid I
Oh.
don't. Yeah. Does anybody feel like you're following the question? You can try
I
to
think I followed it. So when the, I'll say losers, I
Yeah,
don't mean it.
Sure.
When the losers have to go to their second choice.
Because their candidate was eliminated.
In the video, it wasn't clear was that done by percentages, or was that done by their second, their ranking? And I think it was done by ranking
Yeah.
only. It was not done by percentages of first go round. Does that make sense? So if Warren had 60% of the vote, if Warren had 50% of the vote, and Buttigieg had 25, and Amy Klobuchar had 25, the people that were with Bernie, it doesn't get divided by 50%, 25 and 25. It gets divided by the second choice, what your second choice was.
You know what? I think,
Didn't help you, did it?
yeah, I think let's do it again, and then let's see if the question is still there, okay? Let's do it again.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a little, I find this is kind of like explaining to somebody how to ride a bicycle. It's just a lot easier to get a bicycle and try it. Now we're gonna just do that one more time now. Okay, so 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, you got them ranked and ready to go? What is your favorite? Spring, okay, come right over here, if spring is your first. And, let's see what's your first, oh, spring, what's your first? Fall, all right. There's fall, you come over here and hold up your sign, fall. Who's got summer? There you go. I'll keep you right over here. And is there a winter fan? All right, the skiers, there you are, you can hold that up high. All right. Do we have a winner?
No, we don't.
We did not have a majority winner. You know, a point I want to make is that if there is a majority winner right now, if we did have 8 or more people in that corner over there right now, would we ever need to look at anybody's second choice? No. The election would be over. The point of ranked choice voting is very simple. Make sure you have a winner that's supported by the majority. So again, though, with this, anytime you see you got 4, 5, 6 choices, often you don't have a majority winner in the first round. So, Winter, we're so sorry that your candidate will not win, but you know that your voice will count in this election.
But we're only 2-2.
Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't see that, we have 2 of you. So, that's very interesting. Now, one of the things just to point out is that when we have very small numbers of people and lots of choices, you're likely to get a lot of ties. So if you try this at home, you're probably gonna, with family and friends, you'll end up with ties. And ties can be awkward to figure out what's a fair way to solve them. Just know that when ranked choice voting comes to be the way that a whole city or a state votes, they have to have all sorts of rules about how to break ties. So it's no different from the way we vote now. Yes?
Why is it awkward? I mean, why don't the
Why don't we all 4
two
of us get a chance to?
go to your second
We're
choice?
gonna eliminate both of you at the same time, exactly.
Oh, because it would be possible if both those people moved over there, that suddenly they wouldn't be the smallest group anymore, and then there would be another tie. So there has to be some tie-breaking rules, but there's also other arbitrary issues like what order to list the candidates in on a ballot that make a small amount of difference. It's very unlikely to have a tie for eliminating in an actual election.
So there's a bill in the legislature now having to do with ranked ranked choice voting,
Yes.
what are the tie breakers that are listed in that bill?
You know, I'll be happy to tell you all about that when we get to Q&A time, okay?
Okay?
It's a really, we're gonna talk about the bill in just a
Okay.
moment. So let's go ahead and eliminate the two last place candidates, summer and fall, and if you all could go to your next choices. Follow us over here. Good, hold your sign up, what your group is, all right. Looks like we have ready now, we have 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think it, do you have 6?
One lady left.
Oh, okay. Oh, so we're short one. And, but you have,
She wanted spring.
7? And you have 8, 7. All right. Looks like we have a dead tie. So that's not going to be resolved today. 2 great seasons. Does anybody have a question though about the way the ranked choice voting worked?
Oh, the vice president breaks the tie. No, I'm sorry. No, okay.
A little biased, I do like fall to be.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I'm going to declare this one a tie, and at the end of the day, we would have to flip a coin if it's a true tie. In this case, though, what we would do, and because it's ranked choice, is we would look at the previous round, between the two of these choices, which one had the most in the previous round, and I believe it was fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that would be the winner. That would be the typical way that you would break that tie. You could, in the very first round we had a tie, you can't look to the previous round, that's why we have to eliminate both of those at the same time. Thank you, everybody, you did a great job. Good. That makes sense. It's just a caucus, isn't it? Let's see how that works. Okay, see if we can get the slideshow back. Support. So you're spring. Are you going to get stuck on the agenda?
Yes.
So we did the let's vote.
We met up.
So what are the benefits of voting this way? Well, one thing you can see that you have more choices, right? We could put 4 or 5 different choices on the ballot and be sure that we had a majority winner. So there's no more need to have just a top 2. 2 is not very many choices to have on a ballot. Here's the candidates for mayor in Minneapolis recently. And again, you can see a lot of diversity, you can see a lot of choices. You don't have to worry about throwing away your vote, right? Those of you who like skiing and wanted to put winter first, or Joe Biden fans, can vote confidently for your honest first choice, knowing that your voice is not going to be wasted. Your vote isn't going to be wasted, your voice will be heard. This is to me, one of the most appealing, one of my favorite benefits of ranked choice voting. It changes the way candidates campaign. These 2 people both want to be mayor of San Francisco back in June 2018. Do you notice something unusual? Doesn't look like we typically see candidates mudslinging at each other and so on. No, they actually went out together and they said, hey, we have a lot of similar policy views. And Jane Kim said to the voters, vote for me first, but I urge you to vote for my colleague, my whatever his name was, I suddenly lost it, cool. Second, and so on. So first, second.
Warren Sanders could do that.
But wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't it be nice? Hey, I want to be president, but vote for her or him if not.
How would that be for the Democrats if they weren't tearing each other down?
Yeah, exactly.
Before November, yeah? Kind of changes things. Yeah, if you stop and think about it, if I'm a candidate and I'm knocking at your door, I'm looking for your first choice support, and actually, if I see a yard sign for my opponent in your yard, under normal circumstances, I would probably not even knock, would I, right? But if it's a ranked choice election, I'm still gonna come talk to you. I'm gonna say, hey, I see you're voting for my opponent. I want you to know that your opponent and I share these particular views, and would you consider voting for me second? And furthermore, if I now start slinging mud at the person she likes best, pretty bad idea, right? Now, some people will tell you that ranked choice voting doesn't make campaigns more positive, and that's true. It takes a little while for the candidates to learn. So in Maine, in 2018, there was a very negative race for Congress, for a ranked choice race. The guy who was engaging most of the negative rhetoric, lost. And if you look to places that have been using ranked choice voting longer, like Minneapolis and San Francisco, this is what you find. You find that the campaign culture has been transformed. As the candidates figure out that negative campaigning is counterproductive, they better stay focused on the issues, they better stay civil, and they better reach out to all the voters. They're not just talking to their narrow base of first choice supporters, they better talk to everybody, even voters who are gonna vote for somebody else first, but might be willing to put them second or third. Because you saw in our mock election how those second and third choices matter. Yeah, you can't necessarily win with just the first choice of votes.
And this is just for people, not for issues, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. Yeah. So, not surprisingly, voters are liking that transformed campaign culture and so on, the greater civility, and we're seeing increases in voter turnout about 10% in places that are using ranked choice voting. So where are they using it? The state of Maine, in red, using ranked choice now statewide. It's the only state that's using it statewide. Maine will use ranked choice voting in November 2020 to elect the president. Maine has used ranked choice voting to elect their current Congress members, and Susan Collins will be running under ranked choice voting for her to keep her Senate seat in November. The states that are in light blue, Kansas, Wyoming, Alaska, Hawaii, also Nevada, Iowa, I have something to say, I said the math's wrong about Iowa, are using ranked choice in the Democratic 2020 primaries this spring. Iowa made a last minute change and is not, so that's a mistake on my slide, I need to change that. Iowa, it will not. And Nevada will be using it for early voters only. People who won't be coming to the caucus will be given a ranked choice ballot. And the gold states are places where ranked choice voting has been adopted or implemented by some jurisdictions within the states. For example, in California, there are 4 cities that use it. In Minnesota, there are 2 cities that use it. In New Mexico, there are 3 cities that use it, and so on. Did you know this? 100 years ranked choice voting has been used in Australia. It's used in Robert's Rules of Order. It says that anytime you're choosing between more than 2 candidates, you should use ranked choice. And who knows, something that's going on right now in our popular culture that uses ranked choice voting.
It's the Academy Awards.
Yes, the Academy Awards. That's how they vote for the best picture and all those best films. So what's our plan to bring ranked choice voting here to Washington? Well, there's a bill in the legislature right now, House Bill 1722 and Senate Bill 5708, as Carol had exactly correct, called the Local Options Bill. This bill would allow local jurisdictions like Mount Vernon to try ranked choice voting, because right now, you can't. State law says you have to use a top 2. So this bill would let local jurisdictions try ranked choice voting. We think it's a really smart idea. There's no cost, it just gives local jurisdictions that option. So we would love to see you all take up some card writing on behalf of this bill.
Okay, so where would our cards go right now? To the committee?
That's a really good question.
Who has that
Because you
card
actually
somewhere?
physically send them, so yes, there are appropriations members, and Cassie, do you think you could help get that?
I'll just need a second. to
Yeah,
find
yeah,
out.
she'll be with you. In fact, Cassie's gonna be pressing send on an email today to, our supporters in targeted legislative districts who have members on appropriations where this bill needs to get a vote. Basically, that's the next hurdle for this vote right now. Now, you could all contact all of your own representatives individually, just to let them know you support ranked choice voting, and certainly this bill in particular, but just generally letting elected officials know that you care about ranked choice voting is something would be great. But Cassie will let you know specifically where that goes. Well, we know that to get ranked choice voting statewide, it's gonna take a statewide ballot initiative, because it's just doesn't happen in this world, unfortunately, that elected officials willingly change the rules that elected them. And so we don't expect that the state legislature, the local options bill is one thing, to allow, Mount Vernon to try using ranked choice voting. But to actually ask the legislators to change the way that they were elected is very unlikely to happen through legislation. So fortunately, Washington State has the initiative process, and so we are laying plans for a statewide ballot initiative to begin signature gathering about a year from now, that would be targeted for the 2020 ballot, that would bring ranked choice voting to statewide elections. Yeah. And we'll be back in touch, because we'll be needing a lot of signatures. And then, in the meantime, you're actually the first group that we're announcing this, that this spring and summer, we're gonna be launching a kind of a campaign to activate our volunteers all over the state to engage their county officials. Because elections are organized by county, so it makes sense that county commissioners, county councils, county elected officials, and cities within those counties, that they hear from supporters of ranked choice voting, so that those elected officials know that we care about ranked choice voting. In some cases, counties actually do have the authority to make, in a few cases, there are 5 charter counties in our state, and those counties actually do have the authority to change the rules for how they vote and use ranked choice voting. So we'll be launching an effort to engage those folks this spring and summer. You will be hearing from us
So
about that.
who's educating those people?
Cassie's our field director, and she helps mobilize volunteers all over the state. So it's all of us, it's volunteers, and it's
We spent 3 years or more doing all kinds of petitions, gathering signatures on petitions that were taken to whomever was the point of the petition, whether it would be the county commissioners or whatever. And I think that's probably the best way. It would be getting signatures, but and that was all being done for Citizens United.
Yeah, exactly, I-735 maybe. I know David Banks was working.
Well, it was before I-735. It was petitions to try to get each city to make a commitment or to agree with the people that they would speak out.
Like a
in
resolution.
favor of, yeah.
Yeah, good, we're gonna be looking for resolutions for this too.
Yeah.
Good, great idea, I love it. In fact, we've been working with city councils on resolutions in Spokane, Vancouver, Port Angeles, Bellingham, and Olympia so far. So maybe there could be something around here too. We'd be delighted to support that. So other ways that you can get involved, again, all of those efforts that I just mentioned, those 3. In addition, one of the most important things you can do is just sign up with us. By adding your voice, we can come together, and as you know, stronger together, we can get more things done. Legislators this year in Olympia are listening to us ever so much more than last year, when we only had about 400 supporters around the state. This year with over 5,000. They're really tuning in better. So adding your voice by signing up with us really helps. Helping us spread the word, contacting your officials. You can volunteer with us. There's a sign-up sheet in the back, and Cassie's are, as I say, engaging volunteers all over the state, as we all are. Donating, we definitely are glad to have your donations, and doing exactly what we're doing here today, just requesting speakers for your group. If you want to host a little house party, or friends or co-workers, invite us. We'll be delighted to come make a presentation. Or if you've got a large group, a church group, a community group, again, we're very glad. We can do short presentations too. If we can get 5 or 10 minutes on an agenda, we're glad to work with that. This is a luxury to have this much time. And we have a website. Okay, and that is the end of the official presentation, and I would be delighted to take questions. I'm going to ask my colleagues to help me too. Robert and David and Cassie can help answer questions. Do you have any? We took a few as we went, maybe.
How do we contact your group first?
Cassie, do you want to take that one, or how do? I can. So you're working on that answer. Our website, fairvotelaw.org. I can come back to that. Let me just turn this on. Right here has a form where you can request a speaker, and it also, you can email us at info@fairvotelaw.org, and I can leave some of my business cards on the table.
Are you local?
We are all over the state.
I mean,
One of the
you yourself, are you?
Me, myself, pretty all over the state. I actually do have a bed in a house, which is north of Kirkland. But I'm often can be found on the road. Yeah, and same with Cassie. Cassie actually is currently living in Bellingham right now. She's also fairly low state.
Yeah.
Great, well, we must have just covered every question. It's
I just
wonderful.
have one more.
Yeah.
I just think about past initiatives and gathering signatures and trying to explain things to people door to door and how confusing that was. And then thinking how to, I know you train people on how to explain this to people, but it,
In less time,
yeah.
because it took us this whole hour, I feel like now I understand it, but I needed all that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, and that's what's hard is people won't spend the time unless maybe they're in a group
Right.
and they decide to listen
Yeah.
to a speaker, but,
Yeah.
you know, in a 5-minute conversation,
Yeah.
how do you explain it?
Yeah. Should we do a simulation?
Yeah.
Okay,
I was gonna say,
grab a lit card, come on up, and I'll, do you want to be the explainer? And I'll be the,
I can be the explainer.
okay, so imagine that
Yeah.
Cassie's got a table at a fair or festival, and I'm just gonna be somebody who doesn't know anything about ranked choice voting, and I'm walking past. In fact, do you want to just use one of these people?
Sure.
Okay, you want to go ahead and be?
Sure.
You can let
Maybe-
Cassie chill do it.
You can stay right there if you want. I'll come to you. How about that? So, just for any conversation that I have with someone who, I don't know what they know about ranked choice voting, I would start with like, hi, my name's Cassie. We're talking about an issue here called ranked choice voting. Have you heard of it before?
No, never heard of it.
Okay, well, let me start from square one then.
Okay.
So ranked choice voting, and this is what I usually do, I'll put it right in someone's hand. Ranked choice voting is a different way to vote than how we vote right now, where you rank candidates in the order of your preference on the ballot. So you can say your first choice, your second choice, your third choice, etc.
Okay.
No one's forcing you to do anything, you can still just choose one if you want to. This simply gives you the option to rank candidates.
Okay.
There's a lot of benefits to this. The top 3 of them we list right in our little handout here. And I could show it, but it's literally everything we just talked about in the presentation. Simply,
Options.
you have more options on the ballot. So if you wanted to vote for, say, a third-party candidate, or maybe just a non-establishment candidate within a party, this really gives you the option to without throwing your vote away like most people tell you you're going to. Secondly, it allows you to vote for who you really want, which is, once again, going back to the third-party candidates or just non-established candidate, or just someone, within a crowded field. You're allowed to vote for them.
Can you write them in too? Say this is my number 1 choice? This
Sure.
thing?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can definitely write them in.
Okay.
That's, you have a
Washington
fairly low
allows write-ins,
chance.
so definitely, yes, you can.
Yeah,
But you
well,
give them the
but
option.
Still, if that's what you wanted to do.
Right, if that's what you want to do.
Okay.
And then thirdly, and it's my favorite thing right here, is that it really incentivizes candidates to run more positive, more civil, issues-based campaigns. And I think that is just so needed within our society right now.
Can you briefly explain to me why that is?
Absolutely. And I think the best example would be if I was a candidate running for office and I see a yard sign of my opponent in someone's front yard, in the way we vote right now, I would skip that house, right? There's lots of houses on my list, I got things to do. That person's clearly voting for someone else. With ranked choice voting, I still go to that house, but instead of trashing my opponent to that person, I say, hi, you are obviously voting for, X, Y, and Z for your first choice candidate. But that candidate and I actually have a lot in common. We agree about this issue and this issue and this issue. So if you can't put me as your first choice, would you please put me as your second choice on the ballot?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. And the third thing I always talk about, so I say what it is, what the benefits are, where it's being used. There's over 20 jurisdictions in the United States that are currently using this, including the entire state of Maine. So this is nothing crazy, it's nothing new. Some of those places are, places in Utah, places in California. It's completely nonpartisan at the end of the day.
Are other countries using it too?
Yes.
What countries use it?
Australia, for example, has been using it for over 120 years. So it's really, nothing new. It's been around for quite a long time.
They still manage to get a really bad governor.
Yeah,
We can't guarantee that the candidates will be qualified. We can just guarantee that you will have more options on the ballot.
Okay.
Do you think the candidate that we have in office right now is really qualified and it was voted under the existing system?
Cassie, the strength of this is not having, in my mind, it's not about having more choices. It's about the intention of what you want. I mean, because to say you'll have 20 people to choose from or 5 people, I don't find that
Appealing.
The strength
Yeah.
of what you're
Yeah.
presenting.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is good.
Does that make sense as a, and that's how I train my volunteers, is those really 3 things. What it is, what the benefits are, where it's being used.
And you don't feel like you're throwing away your vote. I
Yeah.
like that idea. Don't, and that it helps people be more civil.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are the top benefits.
And if you'll notice, one of the things Cassie did not do that we did, she did not make sure you understand how the votes are counted.
Yeah.
And what we find is that probably upwards of 90% of the people never ask. It's like you get in your car, you turn the ignition, you go. You do not care how the engine works. It is not interesting to you.
Can I make a point there? When we told you to rank on the blank piece of paper, we didn't tell you how to rank. Everybody already knew.
Yeah.
We didn't get any question like, do I write 1, 2, 3? Everybody just did.
Yeah.
So it's the counting part that some people need the explanation for.
Okay.
But, like, what we
But
just
lots
said,
of people won't. Most people won't.
the
Yeah.
vast majority, not most, the vast majority do not ask you how to count up the ballots at the end of the day. And when they do, I have an answer for them. You know, you drop the candidate that received the least number of votes, and then your vote goes to your second choice candidate. It actually doesn't need to be that complicated, but a lot of people, especially volunteers, feel like they need all this information before they can go out and talk about it. You really don't. There's a lot of references out there. You can start with just a really simple, and keep it simple. There's almost a curse of knowledge of when you know too much about elections and politics that you think you need to know and tell people and explain all the stuff, but really, they just want this simple explanation about it.
Yeah, and
People
Cassie,
I was gonna say, people intuitively get right away, mostly women, I would say this, intuitively get right away that if they get to say their second and third choice, that means they have more voice in the election, that means they're gonna have a stronger voice in what comes happen. And there's just this intuitive grasp that makes my vote more powerful, and that is essentially the essence of it.
do you get many questions about what happens if there's a tie? Probably
No,
not.
I literally never. I think in the last year that I've been,
Well, other than
presenter.
here.
Yeah, other than like, once again, we get these kind of more in-depth questions
Yeah.
here. When people who have been involved in politics for, their whole lifetime are really ingrained in this stuff and want to know the really in-the-weeds stuff. That's the people who ask. And I'm sure you could get, 1 out of 30 or 40 people who will ask those kind of questions. But that's why we have the handout. That's why we have people that are volunteering with you that usually know a pretty in-depth knowledge of ranked choice voting and how all this works.
I have a question. If you wear your Fair Vote Washington, does anybody walk up to you and say, what's that about?
Of course, all the
Yes?
time.
Okay.
That's also why we have these buttons that are at our handy information table if you would like to take one that say, ask me about ranked choice voting. You put it on your backpack and you'll get a question about it at the train station or at the bus stop.
Okay.
It's
I wear
great.
my t-shirt at the gym and it gets lots of traffic.
Oh,
So one other question,
Yeah.
where it's currently being used, this process, is it is there a tendency that those areas are paper voting or electronic, or do you know?
I believe they're all paper voting. I don't think there's
That's
any.
such a good question. I don't think I've had that exact question before, so I'm not totally 100% sure of the answer. But I think the simple thing is to say that paper voting is absolutely the gold standard. And places that aren't having paper voting, should be moving to paper voting. So we're in a good position in Washington to adopt ranked choice voting. And I believe that all the places I'm aware of that use ranked choice voting are also paper voting.
Yeah.
California is moving to electronic, isn't it?
But they have a paper record of it. Yeah.
And that's the best standard for election security is to have a paper record of that.
So do you run into people who push back?
Yeah.
And say, I don't like it, and here's why.
Yeah.
What do
Absolutely.
you run into? What's the main reason they say, I don't wanna change, or I don't trust you, or
I think all of those above is pretty much the answers I get that, some people just kind of take it as a partisan issue right off the bat.
it's Democratic issues, so it's Democrats.
Sometimes, yeah.
Right.
It depends on where you are, for sure.
It's a conspiracy.
It's a change. It's a change, and people are not used to changes, and especially something changing with elections. There's always a concern about security when it comes to that.
Right.
But I think even more than that, the biggest criticism that we get of ranked choice voting is really that it's too confusing for voters at the end of the day. And to be honest, I think
It's
this
not
is not.
confusing.
It's not confusing, and the people that think are confusing are like, oh, what about the person with the very low education status who are gonna get confused by what's on the ballot? And it's usually a little kind of a pretentious argument, is because we're not believing that everyone has the ability to vote or to rank candidates. And as you just saw, we didn't tell you any instructions whatsoever. We don't really ever tell anyone instructions when we have ballots out and we have an example of rank your favorite fair food, or, you know, rank your favorite dinosaurs for kids as young as 4 years old can figure it out. So we think you can figure it out. We believe that.
Let's take one last question, and then I'm looking at the clock, and we need to say, coffee and cars is over.
Well, I was just going to comment that when it comes to the, to discussing the second or third round of the voting, it's easy to say, it's okay because you don't lose your vote.
That's really important.
Yeah, just simply to say, you don't lose your vote.
Yep.
Yeah.
I always say, like, you choose, you know, you choose who you vote for. No one else is choosing where your vote goes or what happens to it. It's always you. It's always whatever you put on that ballot is really what stays with your vote.
So thank you, Cassie, thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
having us. Sign up with us if you can, there's a clipboard going around, there's another one here. Robert's got information for you, and we hope to hear from you again, thank you.
Thank you.